If you accuse my wife again, you'll never see my child." Those words cut through the sterile air of the hospital like a blade. My son, my only son, stood there, face flushed with rage, while nurses froze mid-step and a young mother in the next bed turned her head away. I was still in my hospital gown, the tiny knitted hat I'd made for my grandson trembling in my hands. The baby had been born just 3 hours ago, but in that instant, something inside me withered. He didn't even let me touch the child. 1 minute I was leaning forward whispering, "Let me hold him, just once," and the next, he snatched the newborn from my arms as if I were a stranger. "Mom, stop it," he hissed. "You're upsetting everyone." His wife Lena lay pale and perfect in her bed, her hand resting dramatically over her heart. Her eyes glistened, not with pain, but with something else, fear perhaps, or guilt. The room was too bright. I could hear the soft beep of the monitors, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint sweetness of baby lotion. My knees weakened. A nurse reached out to steady me, but I waved her away. I wasn't sick. I was simply stunned. Stunned by the look in my son's eyes, a look I had never seen before. Not even when his father died had he looked at me with such coldness. I wanted to scream, "What did I do wrong? I only said he didn't look like you." But the words choked inside my throat, because deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. It wasn't just that the baby didn't look like my son, it was something far stranger, far heavier. The first time I saw him, swaddled in the white hospital blanket, I felt something twist in my stomach. There, on the soft skin of his left shoulder, was a small red birthmark shaped like a teardrop. My breath caught. I had seen that mark before decades ago on the man who used to live next door, Mr. Hale. I blinked, told myself it was a coincidence. Marks like that happen all the time, don't they? But as I looked closer, the curve, the shape, the faint smudge beneath it was identical. My heart began to hammer. Mr. Hale had moved away 3 years ago, not long after my son married Lena. I remembered how often she'd gone over to borrow something or ask for advice when my son worked late. I had never thought much of it until now. When I whispered to my son, "He doesn't look like you," I didn't mean it as an accusation. I just wanted him to see what I saw, to share my unease. But the moment the words left my lips, his face hardened. He turned toward Lena, who began to sob, and suddenly I was the monster who had ruined their perfect moment. The nurse cleared her throat. "Ma'am, maybe you should rest for a bit." Rest. As if rest could erase the image of that red teardrop seared into my memory. I stumbled out of the room, clutching the knitted hat like a lifeline. The hallway lights buzzed overhead. Through the nursery window, I saw rows of infants sleeping peacefully, little fists curled against their chests. And among them my grandson, his tiny shoulder exposed for a heartbeat as the nurse adjusted his blanket. The mark glowed under the fluorescent light. My vision blurred. I leaned against the cold glass and whispered, "What have you done, Lena?" That was the last time I saw him up close. The next morning, when I returned with flowers and a small silver rattle engraved with his initials, the nurse told me gently that visitors weren't allowed anymore. "Family request," she said. Family. I was his family. Or I thought I was. Outside, snow had begun to fall. The parking lot shimmered white under the hospital lights. I stood there, watching the flakes melt against my coat, wondering when my world had started to collapse. Maybe it wasn't today. Maybe it had been falling apart slowly, ever since the day Lena moved in next door. But one thing was certain. That little red mark had opened a wound that would never heal. You think I'm exaggerating? You think I saw something that wasn't there? Then let me tell you what happened next, how a single teardrop of red destroyed an entire family. Before all this began, our home was filled with the scent of warm apples and cinnamon. Every Sunday morning, I baked the same pie my mother used to make a ritual that made the house smell like safety. My son David would tease me, saying, "Mom, one day Lena's going to steal that recipe and open her own bakery." And Lena would laugh, brushing flour off her dress, pretending to be the perfect daughter-in-law. That was before the silence started creeping in, before the laughter turned into polite nods. Before the smell of apples was replaced by the sterile scent of candles, Lena liked expensive ones that smelled like nothing at all. Our house sat on a quiet street in the outskirts of town, the kind of place where neighbors waved but rarely talked. I'd lived there for 40 years. Every scratch on the kitchen table told a story. Every creak in the stairs was a memory. When David got married, I thought my life would finally feel complete again. He'd found someone kind. I believed a young woman who smiled easily, who called me Mom from the very first dinner we had together. But over time, I started to notice how calculated her kindness was. She was always perfect when people were around pouring me tea, asking about my garden, complimenting my sweaters. Yet, when we were alone, her tone changed. "You should rest more," she'd say, smiling too sweetly. "You forget things sometimes." "Forget things?" It began as a whisper, a seed of doubt she planted so softly that even I almost believed her. When they moved into my house after the wedding, I was happy. The house had felt so empty since my husband passed away. David said it would be temporary, just until they saved enough for their own place. But months turned into years, and I began to feel like a guest in my own home. Lena rearranged the furniture, replaced the curtains, and repainted the kitchen a color she called modern beige. She said the old yellow reminded her of grandmother's wallpaper. Still, I told myself not to mind. Peace was more important than pride. Then came the small things, the phone calls that stopped when I entered the room, the sudden quiet at dinner, the way David's eyes searched Lena's face for approval before answering me. One night, I went to check the laundry and heard Lena's voice from the kitchen. "He'll never find out," she whispered, her back turned, phone pressed to her ear. I froze in the hallway. The words hung in the air like smoke. "He'll never find out." Find out what? I wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe she was planning a surprise for my son. But her tone wasn't the tone of someone planning something joyful. It was sharp, breathless, almost fearful. After that night, I started noticing details that didn't fit. A man's cologne on her scarf that wasn't David's. The way she'd step outside to answer calls, speaking low, glancing toward the window. And then there was the neighbor, Mr. Hale. He'd lived next door before he moved away 3 years ago. A quiet man, widowed, polite. He often offered to help with repairs when my husband passed, but I rarely accepted. Lena, however, found excuses. "He's so handy," she'd say. "David's always at work, and Mr. Hale knows how to fix the porch." I remember watching from the kitchen window as they stood too close, their laughter carrying across the yard. When Mr. Hale left town, Lena seemed oddly restless for weeks. She stopped baking, stopped smiling. I thought she simply missed having a friendly neighbor. I told myself not to assume the worst. After all, mothers are supposed to trust their children's choices. But now, years later, after seeing that birthmark, those memories began to burn through my mind like acid. Sometimes, at night, I'd wake up to the sound of their baby monitor's soft static, then a faint cry. I'd imagine going into their room, just to look at the baby sleeping, to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But then I'd remember David's words, "If you accuse my wife again." I wasn't allowed near him anymore. Still, I couldn't stop thinking of that birthmark. I could see it every time I closed my eyes, glowing red against soft skin. One morning, as I passed their door, I heard Lena singing a lullaby, a tune I didn't recognize. It wasn't the kind of melody American mothers usually hummed. It was something older, slower, almost haunting. The sound of it sent a chill down my spine. I paused outside the door and whispered through the wood, "He's beautiful, you know." Her voice turned sharp. "Don't wake him." That's when I knew the walls of my home no longer belonged to me. I had become a shadow, a ghost walking through hallways that once echoed with love. Sometimes, when the afternoon sun hits the kitchen window, I still see dust floating in the air, tiny golden specks like the ones that used to dance above the apple pie crust as it cooled. For a moment, I almost believe everything is still the same. But then I hear a door slam upstairs, and her footsteps, fast, deliberate, remind me that the peace I once knew has been replaced by something colder. You may think I'm being paranoid, that I'm reading too much into things, but I promise you evil doesn't always arrive with thunder and screams. Sometimes, it walks softly, wearing perfume that smells like vanilla and smiles that look like love. And I had just begun to understand what kind of woman my daughter-in-law really was. It started with the smallest things so ordinary that no one else would have noticed. A grocery receipt that disappeared from the counter, my favorite teacup missing from its hook, the mail arriving already opened. At first I brushed it off as forgetfulness. Maybe I was getting older, just as Lena liked to remind me. "Don't worry, Mom," she'd say. smiling with that faint sweetness that never quite reached her eyes. "You probably misplaced it. It happens." Her tone was gentle enough to sound caring, but underneath it was something else: condescension, maybe even control. I began keeping small notes to myself on the fridge: teacup in cabinet, mail brought in, groceries paid in cash. I wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But each time I left the kitchen, she'd walk past and tear the notes down. "No need to clutter the fridge," she'd chirp. One morning, I came downstairs to find her already there, phone pressed to her ear, whispering. The moment she saw me, she hung up. "Morning, Mom," she said, a little too quickly. "David's running late again. You know how he is." I nodded, watching her pour coffee into her mug. My mug, the one with the faded blue flowers. She must have felt my stare, because she set the mug down slowly and said, "You like this one? I can buy you another." It wasn't the mug that bothered me. It was the way she said it, as if everything in this house, even the smallest object, now belonged to her. Later that week, I overheard her complaining on the phone again. "She's impossible," she whispered. "Always watching, always asking questions. I can't breathe in that house." The words stung. I had given her everything: a roof, warmth, love, and she spoke of me as though I were a burden, an obstacle to her peace. When David came home that evening, I tried to tell him. I hesitated, not wanting to sound paranoid. "She's been different lately. Cold, distant." He sighed. "Mom, Lena's under a lot of stress. The baby's coming soon. You have to stop imagining things." Imagining. That word settled like a weight in my chest. After that, I noticed more. The way Lena would change the subject every time I brought up the past, especially the old neighborhood where Mr. Hale once lived. "Oh, that's ancient history," she'd say, laughing nervously. "People move on." But she hadn't. I saw it in her eyes, something flickering, like the shadow of a memory she was trying to bury. One afternoon, while tidying the nursery, I found a small framed photo on the floor. It must have fallen from the shelf. I picked it up, brushing off the dust, and froze. It was Lena, smiling at the camera, and standing beside her was a man I hadn't seen in years, Mr. Hale. They were at a picnic, the kind our neighborhood used to hold every summer. She was leaning toward him, her hand on his arm, sunlight falling across their faces. It looked intimate. When I heard footsteps coming down the hall, I quickly placed the photo back where I found it. But that evening, when I went to look again, the frame was gone. Replaced by a new one this time, a picture of Lena and David on their honeymoon. I said nothing, but inside, a quiet unease began to coil. The next morning, as we sat for breakfast, Lena looked up from her coffee and smiled. "You know, Mr. Hale called last week," she said casually. My heart yolted. "Oh?" "He asked about the old neighborhood," she continued, stirring her cup. "Said he might stop by when he's in town." I tried to keep my voice steady. "That's nice." Her eyes met mine, a flash of something sharp behind her calm expression. "Yes," she said softly. "It'll be interesting to see him again." I knew then that she was daring me, testing how much I'd say, how much I'd risk. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the creaks of the old house, the faint hum of the baby monitor they'd already set up in the nursery. Every sound felt heavy with meaning. My thoughts kept circling back to the picture, the missing photo, and the smell of Mr. Hale's cologne, woodsy, faintly bitter, that I'd caught once again on her scarf earlier that day. I told myself it was all coincidence. It had to be. But in my bones, something old and maternal stirred the instinct that had kept me alive through grief and loneliness. The same instinct that had warned me, long before my husband's heart gave out, that something was deeply wrong. Maybe it wasn't my imagination after all. Maybe it was the beginning of something much darker. You see, trust dies quietly. It doesn't explode, it fades. One glance, one half smile, one missing photograph at a time. And in our house, trust had already begun to rot. I used to think shadows came only at night. But ever since that day, they began showing up even under sunlight, long, quiet, and heavy with memories I couldn't seem to shake off. It started with an innocent errand. Lena asked me to bring up an old photo album from the basement, the one marked summer 2016. I hesitated. That was the year before David married her, the year Mr. Hale still lived next door. Dust danced in the light as I opened the cardboard box. The scent of old paper and mildew filled the air, carrying me back to warmer days when the backyard was alive with laughter. I flipped through the photos, my fingers trembling slightly. There was David at the grill, his arms slung over Lena's shoulders. And there, on the very next page, stood Mr. Hale, tall, broad, his sun hat shadowing that familiar birthmark on his neck. Lena was standing beside him, holding a plate of pie. Her smile looked too bright, too eager, the kind of smile you give someone who knows a secret you don't want revealed. I closed the album and stared at it for a long time. I told myself it meant nothing, but deep down, I knew better. That evening, when Lena returned home from the grocery store, I tried to ask casually, "Do you ever hear from Mr. Hale anymore?" Her hand froze mid-air, the grocery bag rustling as she set it on the counter. "Why would I?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes cautious. "Oh, just wondering," I said. "He was always so helpful around the neighborhood. You two got along well back then." She smiled too quickly. "You're misremembering, Mom. He was just nice to everyone." "Of course," I murmured. "Just everyone." Something flickered across her face. Fear, anger, guilt, I couldn't tell. Then, she reached into the bag, pulled out a jar of applesauce, and placed it on the table in front of me. "I bought this for you," she said. "Since baking's too tiring for you these days." The words landed like a slap. I waited until she went upstairs before opening my laptop. My hands shook as I typed Hale, Richard, Springfield, Missouri. A few results appeared. An old address, a work listing, a small obituary for his wife from years ago. And then one line that made my pulse race. Relocated to a neighboring town, now runs a hardware store on Main Street. He wasn't far. I didn't tell anyone. But that night, when I stepped outside to water the plants, I noticed Lena watching me through the curtain, her face half hidden in the darkness. The next morning I found my computer unplugged. When I asked David, he said, "Mom, please stop digging into old stuff. Lena told me you've been acting odd lately." Odd. That's what they call it when you see what others refuse to. I tried to swallow my anger. "David," I said quietly, "if something ever seems wrong, promise me you'll listen. Really listen." He smiled, distracted. "Sure, Mom, but you need to rest more. Lena's worried about you." Lena's worried about me. Those words made my stomach twist. Days later, when I came into the living room, Lena was sitting with a stack of papers on her lap. Bank forms, I thought. But as soon as she saw me, she folded them and tucked them into her bag. "Just hospital insurance stuff," she said too quickly. "For the baby." I nodded, though something in her tone felt rehearsed. That night, as rain drummed softly against the window, I dreamed of Mr. Hale. He was standing in my garden, the same patch of roses he once helped me trim, his hand reaching toward me, that same teardrop-shaped mark glistening on his skin. When I woke, my heart pounded as if I had seen a ghost. I went to the kitchen for water but froze when I heard voices upstairs, David and Lena arguing. "She's starting to suspect," Lena hissed. "Suspect what?" David's voice was tight. There was a pause, then a soft, trembling sigh. "That I'm tired of her watching us all the time. She's making me nervous." A lie. Clean and cruel. I crept back to bed, the floorboards cold beneath my feet. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened, made pancakes, hummed softly, placed a plate before me. "Eat, Mom," she said cheerfully. "You look pale." But I couldn't eat. The air felt thick, heavy with something unsaid. That afternoon, when I opened my email, I saw a message from an unfamiliar sender. "Richard Hale, Re. Your inquiry." Before I could click it, Lena's voice called from behind me. "Mom, could you help with the laundry?" I turned. She was standing in the doorway, her face calm, but her hands clasped too tightly together. I clicked delete instead. That night, when I passed her room, I heard her whispering softly on the phone again. The same tone as before, the same words almost exactly. "He'll never find out." I returned to my room, heart pounding, and stared at the dark ceiling. She was right. My son would never find out. Not yet. But one day, he would. And when that day came, I prayed I'd still be alive to see the truth destroy her. It was still dark when the phone rang that morning. I had fallen asleep on the couch, the television murmuring softly, when David's trembling voice jolted me awake. "Mom, it's time," he said. Lena's in labor. We're heading to Street Mary's. The clock read 4:13 a.m. I threw on my coat and grabbed the small hospital bag I'd packed days ago, just in case. I had knit a tiny blue hat for the baby, the same color as David's eyes when he was born. I told myself this would be a day of joy, that all the tension, all the cold looks and whispered doubts would disappear once I saw that little life breathing in my arms. But when I arrived, the corridors of the maternity ward felt too quiet. The air smelled of antiseptic and worry. I found David pacing outside the delivery room, rubbing his hands together. "She's been in there for 2 hours," he muttered. "They said it's normal." He looked nervous, pale, younger somehow. I wanted to touch his arm, tell him everything would be fine, but he was already pulling away from me, lost in his own storm of worry and pride. At 6:47, a nurse appeared at the door. "It's a boy," she said, smiling. 7 pounds even. David exhaled hard, almost collapsing into a chair. I followed the nurse inside. The room was dimly lit, the blinds half closed. Machines beeped softly, and Lena lay still, her face glistening with sweat. When she turned to me, her smile was faint but triumphant. "He's beautiful," she whispered. The nurse lifted the baby from the bassinet and handed him to her. My heart trembled. The tiny creature squirmed, eyes closed, lips pursed. His skin was soft and pale, his hair darker than David's. "Would you like to hold him, Grandma?" the nurse asked. Lena hesitated for half a second, too short for anyone else to notice, but long enough for me to feel it. Then she nodded. "Yes, of course." I reached out, my hands shaking. The moment his warm body rested in my arms, something ancient and tender rose inside me. I had waited years for this someone small to care for again, a piece of my family to continue living after I was gone. But when I moved the blanket aside to adjust his head, my breath caught. There it was. On his left shoulder, a small red birthmark in the shape of a teardrop. My fingers froze midair. The room tilted. I stared, unable to look away, every cell in my body screaming that I had seen this before. That same shape, that same mark years ago, when Mr. Hale helped fix the fence and removed his shirt under the July Sunday. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be, but it was. The nurse smiled at me, oblivious. "He's a healthy boy." Lena's gaze followed mine, and for the briefest instant, our eyes met. Her smile faltered. Fear flickered across her face, quickly hidden, but I saw it. Oh, I saw it. I handed the baby back before I could drop him. My arms felt like lead. David burst through the door moments later, his grin wide and proud. "Isn't he perfect, Mom?" "Perfect," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned over his wife, kissing her forehead. "You did it, sweetheart." She nodded, eyes glistening, still holding the baby close. I stood by the window, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to say something, to ask about the mark, to demand an explanation, but my throat closed. When the nurse took the baby to clean him, I followed her out into the hallway. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Does that little mark on his shoulder mean anything? Is it hereditary?" She shrugged kindly. "Most aren't. Just a coincidence." Coincidence. The word echoed inside me as I returned to the room. Lena was watching me now, her face pale, eyes sharp. When I entered, she turned away and whispered something to David. He frowned. "Mom," he said slowly, "maybe you should go home and rest. You look tired." I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Lena's hand tightened on his arm. "She's just worried," she murmured. "It's been a long night." I stared at her, her delicate features, her soft voice, her perfect calm, and for the first time, I saw not a daughter-in-law, but an enemy cloaked in sweetness. I took one last look at the baby, swaddled tight, sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. The blanket covered the mark now, but I could still see it in my mind, red, glistening, impossible to unsee. I placed the knitted hat on the bedside table and whispered, "Welcome to the world, little one." Then I turned and left before the tears reached my throat. In the hallway, a nurse called after me, "Ma'am, don't forget your visitor badge." I glanced down. It said grandmother. Temporary access. Temporary. That word would haunt me long after that day. Because from that moment on, everything about my place in that family, my role, my worth, Even my right to hold my grandson would become temporary too. And though no one else saw it, I knew the truth had already been born. It was small. It was red. And it was shaped like a tear. The first few days after the baby's birth passed like a fog I couldn't see through. Everyone smiled, everyone spoke softly, and yet underneath the sweetness, there was a tension I could almost taste. I visited the hospital every day, bringing soup, fresh flowers, anything to show that I cared. But each time I walked into that sterile room, Lena's face stiffened. She'd clutch the baby tighter, pretending to adjust his blanket, and my son, my dear David, would glance between us like a man standing on a frozen lake, afraid to move. On the third day, I stood by the crib as the nurse checked the baby's vitals. For a brief moment, the blanket slipped. The red teardrop birthmark peeked out from his shoulder again, bright against his skin. I froze. The nurse smiled at me, unaware of my dread. "He's got such distinct features," she said. "You'll never lose track of this little one in a crowd." I nodded stiffly. "Yes," I murmured. "Distinct." When I turned, Lena was watching me. Her lips curved upward, but her eyes were cold, sharp enough to cut through me. That night I barely slept. I kept seeing the mark, glowing in the dark like an accusation. My thoughts raced in circles. Was I imagining things? Could it truly be coincidence? I tried to recall David as a newborn, his little hands, the curve of his shoulders, but there had been no mark. Nothing like this. By the time they were discharged, my doubts had grown roots. At home, everything was different. Lena moved through the house as if she'd always owned it. She spoke softly to David, made careful lists for feeding schedules, and shut the nursery door every time I walked by. The air smelled faintly of baby powder and distrust. On the first night back, I knocked gently. "Would you like me to help with the baby?" I asked. She smiled without looking up from the crib. "No need. You should rest, Mom. You've done enough." Done enough. The words stung more than they should have. But I obeyed, stepping back into the hallway. As I turned away, I heard her humming softly a lullaby I'd never heard before. Slow, haunting, not in English. It made the hair on my arms rise. Later, as I passed their room again, I heard her whispering. "She saw it," she said, her voice barely audible. "I think she knows." My hand froze on the doorknob. David's voice followed, low, uncertain. "Knows what?" Lena hesitated. "That you're exhausted, that she's losing her grip. I'm worried about her." I pressed my back to the wall, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream, to burst into the room and shout that I wasn't crazy, that I knew what I saw. But I didn't. I stayed silent, the way widows learn to when no one believes them. The next morning, I found David sitting at the kitchen table. He looked tired, distant. "Mom," he said, rubbing his temples, "Lena told me you've been acting strange, saying odd things." "Strange?" I tried to smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just noticed the baby has a—" He raised a hand, cutting me off. "Don't start, please. Lena's been through a lot. She doesn't need any more stress." "I'm not trying to cause stress," I said quietly. "I'm trying to protect this family." He shook his head, avoiding my gaze. "Sometimes love looks like control, Mom. Maybe it's time you let go." Let go. As if letting go of my son, my grandson, my home, could ever be love. After he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the old clock ticking on the wall. The morning light fell through the blinds in narrow stripes, cutting across the linoleum floor. In the faint hum of the refrigerator, I could hear my own breathing, uneven, shallow. I stood up, walked to the nursery, and opened the door without knocking. Lena turned sharply, the baby in her arms. "Oh, you startled me," she said too quickly. "I just wanted to see him." Her lips tightened. "He's sleeping." "I'll be quiet," I whispered, stepping closer. But she shifted slightly, positioning her body between me and the crib. Her face softened, voice lowering into that honeyed tone she used when she wanted to seem kind. "I know you mean well, but you should really rest. You've been anxious. David worries about you." Anxious. It was a word she wielded like a knife. I turned to leave, my heart pounding, when the baby let out a small whimper. She rocked him gently, and as she did, his blanket slipped again. The mark flashed before my eyes, red, perfectly shaped. And in that moment, Lena looked up straight into my eyes. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not warm, not kind, but victorious. I said nothing. I simply nodded and left the room. That evening, I wrote down what I'd seen. Every detail. The date, the time, the position of the mark. I folded the note and placed it inside my Bible. I wasn't sure what I would do next, but I knew one thing. The truth was no longer a shadow. It was alive, breathing, wrapped in a blanket, and sleeping under the roof of my own house. And every time I heard his tiny cry echo through the walls, I felt that truth calling me closer, daring me to say it aloud. But not yet. Not until I had proof. It was a Sunday afternoon, bright and crisp, the kind of day that used to bring peace to the house. David had just finished mowing the lawn, the baby was napping upstairs, and I had baked an apple pie, the first one since the birth. I wanted things to feel normal again. I wanted to believe that we were still a family. When Lena came into the kitchen, she smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Smells nice," she said, tying her hair back neatly. "You didn't have to bake. You've been tired lately." "I wanted to," I said simply, cutting a slice for David. "It's tradition." David came in, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You still make the best pies, Mom," he said, grinning. That one small compliment warmed something in me, until I noticed Lena watching, her lips pressed thin. We sat around the table trying to pretend we were happy. The baby monitor crackled softly beside the sugar bowl. "So," I began carefully, "I heard from the old postman yesterday. He mentioned that Mr. Hale's hardware store reopened in Millerton." Lena's fork paused midair. David didn't look up. "Oh yeah? I hadn't heard." I kept my voice light. "He said Mr. Hale's doing well. You remember him, don't you, Lena? You two used to talk quite a bit." The air thickened. Lena set down her fork, her tone soft but clipped. "That was years ago, Mom." "Yes," I said, staring at her. "Years ago." For a moment, no one spoke. The baby monitor hummed like static in the silence. Then David chuckled awkwardly. "Let's not bring up old neighbors. It's a good day." But the seed was already planted. I saw Lena's hand tremble slightly as she reached for her glass. A few minutes later, she stood up suddenly. "I'll check on the baby." As she left the room, I whispered, "David, there's something I need to tell you." He frowned. "Mom, please don't start." "I'm not starting anything, but that mark on his shoulder—" "Stop." His tone snapped like a whip. "We're not doing this again. I'm just saying it looks familiar. You don't see it, do you?" His face reddened. "Mom, that's enough." The sound of his anger startled even him. The baby began to cry upstairs, the monitor hissing sharply. Lena's footsteps pounded on the floor above. I stared at my son, my heart breaking. "Why are you shouting at me? I'm your mother." He looked down, rubbing his temples. "I just need you to trust us. Lena's had a rough recovery. You're not helping by implying things." "I'm not implying," I said quietly. "I'm observing." "Observing?" he repeated, his laugh bitter. "You sound insane." The word hit me like a slap. The kitchen blurred. I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. "David," I whispered, "please, listen to me. I'm not crazy. There's something—" The door creaked open. Lena stood there, the baby in her arms, her face pale and perfect, as if she'd rehearsed this moment. "Everything okay down here?" she asked softly. David stood, his voice tight. Mom was just leaving. I looked at him, then at her. "Leaving?" He nodded. "You should rest. Maybe spend a few days with Aunt Marie. Get some space." I opened my mouth to protest, but the baby whimpered, and Lena shushed him gently. Then she turned to me with that sweet, poisonous smile. "We all need peace, don't we, Mom?" "Peace!" The word tasted like ash. I went upstairs and packed slowly, my hands trembling. Through the crack of their bedroom door, I could hear them talking. "She's confused," Lena whispered. "She's imagining things. Maybe it's grief." Grief. As if I were mourning my sanity instead of my family. When I stepped out, David hugged me stiffly. "I love you, Mom, but you have to stop these accusations. It's not fair to Lena, or the baby." Accusations. That night, Aunt Marie's guest room smelled like lavender and silence. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when telling the truth had become a crime. But as I closed my eyes, I could still see that red mark, glowing like a warning in the dark, and I realized something terrifying. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were rewriting the story. Soon, I wouldn't just be the crazy old woman with too many suspicions. I'd be the villain in my own son's eyes. And once that happened, nothing I said would matter anymore. 2 weeks passed before I was invited back. The message came in David's voice, hesitant but polite. "We're having a small gathering for the baby, just family and a few neighbors. Lena thought you'd want to come." Of course I wanted to come. I had spent those 2 weeks pacing Aunt Marie's porch, listening to the phone that never rang, waiting for any sign that I was still part of my son's life. I pressed my best dress, baked 2 apple pies, and told myself this was a chance to mend everything. When I arrived, the house looked different. New curtains, fresh paint. Even the scent had changed. No more apples, just sterile air and faint perfume. My steps felt small, uncertain. Lena opened the door wearing a soft blue dress, her hair neatly pinned. "Mom," she said warmly, "I'm so glad you came." Her smile was flawless. Only her eyes betrayed the chill behind it. Inside, voices filled the air. David's coworkers, 2 of Lena's cousins and a few neighbors from down the street. Balloons floated near the ceiling, and the dining table was covered in baby blue decorations. In the middle sat my grandson, asleep in a white bassinet, his tiny fists tucked under his chin. For a moment my heart softened. I moved toward him quietly, reaching out to touch his hand, but before I could, Lena's voice cut in. "Careful, Mom, he just fell asleep." I froze, pulling back. "Of course," I murmured. "He's perfect." David appeared beside her, smiling for the crowd. "Everyone, this is my mother," he announced. "She's the one who makes the famous apple pies." There was polite laughter, a few claps. I smiled faintly and placed my dish on the table. As people mingled, I stayed near the window, watching. Lena floated from guest to guest like a hostess in full command of her kingdom. Every word she spoke was gracious, every gesture measured. No one could have guessed that, just weeks ago, she'd turned my son against me. At one point, Mrs. Peters, the neighbor from 2 houses down, leaned close to me and whispered, "Such a handsome baby. Doesn't he look just like that man who used to live next door? What was his name again?" My stomach dropped. "Mr. Hale?" She snapped her fingers. "That's it. Hale. The same chin, don't you think?" Before I could answer, I felt Lena's presence beside me. "Excuse me," she said sweetly. "Mrs. Peters, would you like another drink?" The older woman nodded, oblivious to the tension. Lena poured her a glass, her movements graceful but stiff. When Mrs. Peters turned away, Lena's smile vanished. She leaned in close, her voice a whisper only I could hear. "If you ever mention his name again," she said softly, "you'll never see this child." Her words were like ice against my skin. I tried to steady my breathing. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to," she replied, her smile snapping back in place as David walked over. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked. "Perfect," Lena said. "Mom was just telling Mrs. Peters how happy we are." I looked at my son, his trusting eyes, his tired smile, and something inside me cracked. I wanted to scream the truth, to tear through the lies that wrapped this house like plastic wrap. But instead, I nodded. "Yes," I whispered, "happy." The afternoon dragged on. Laughter, chatter, clinking glasses. I felt like a ghost wandering through a stranger's celebration. When David finally handed me the baby, I held him carefully, afraid that even my touch might cause another explosion. He stirred slightly, opening his eyes blue, just like David's. But when he stretched, the blanket slipped, revealing that familiar mark on his shoulder, a red teardrop. It pulsed faintly against his pale skin, a cruel reminder of everything I'd lost. Lena noticed it too. She stepped forward quickly, tugging the blanket back up, her voice light. "Time for his nap." She took the baby from my arms, her perfume brushing my cheek. "You should rest, Mom," she said. "You've done enough for today." Done enough. The same phrase again. I watched as she carried the baby upstairs, her blue dress swaying with every step. The guests began to leave, one by one, offering kind words I barely heard. When the door finally closed, I turned to David. "Do you remember what Mrs. Peters said?" He frowned. "About what?" "The baby. She said he looked like Mr. Hale. His eyes darkened. Mom, don't start. I'm not starting. Please. His voice was sharp now. You're embarrassing yourself. I opened my mouth, but he walked away before I could answer. Outside, dusk settled over the street. The last of the guests were leaving, waving from their cars. I lingered on the porch, clutching my purse, feeling the night air press cold against my face. Through the upstairs window, I saw a silhouette Lena, holding the baby near the curtain. For one brief second, she looked down at me and smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, just enough to say, I've won. I turned and walked away, the echo of her threat following me down the driveway like a shadow I could never outrun. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something dreadful. She wasn't just silencing me, she was erasing me, piece by piece. And soon, even my grandson would grow up not knowing I ever existed. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet days that feel harmless until they aren't. I was out of flour and sugar, so I decided to walk to the small grocery on Maple Street. The air was cool and steady, the kind of weather that usually calmed me. I remember thinking how good it would feel to bake again, how maybe, just maybe, I could carry a pie over to David's house as a peace offering. The bell above the shop door jingled when I entered. I picked up a basket and took my time down the aisles, enjoying the soft hum of refrigerators and the faint scent of oranges. It felt good to be invisible for a while, to be no one but a woman buying flour, until I heard a familiar voice. Mrs. Nolan? I turned. Standing near the coffee shelves was Mr. Hale. His hair had grayed, and there were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before, but I recognized that same steady gaze, the same calm smile. Well, he said, stepping closer, I'll be damned. How long has it been? I tried to smile. 3 years, maybe 4. He chuckled softly. And how's the family? I heard David got married. Yes, I said, my throat tightening. He did. They just had a baby. His face lit up. Congratulations, boy or girl? A boy, I said quietly. He reached for a jar of coffee, setting it in his basket. That's wonderful. I hope he's healthy. Then he added casually, still got that little mark? The one on his shoulder, shaped like a drop of paint? The words hit me like ice water. What did you say? He blinked, surprised. Lena showed me a photo last year, when she was still living here. She laughed and said the baby would probably have the same birthmark I do. Guess she was right, huh? The air left my lungs. I felt dizzy, gripping the handle of the cart for balance. Mr. Hale frowned. Are you all right? I didn't mean to. But before he could finish, another voice chimed in from behind me. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Nolan, it was Janice, one of Lena's friends, the kind who loved to gossip. She glanced between us, curiosity flashing in her eyes. Small town, huh? Didn't know you two knew each other. I forced a smile that barely held. We used to be neighbors. Mr. Hale nodded. Good people. Helped me after my wife passed. Always kept a neat garden. Janice tilted her head. And you know Lena too, don't you? He hesitated, then smiled politely. Sure, she's a sweet girl. Something in Janice's expression shifted interest, maybe suspicion. She looked at me, then at him, her eyebrows lifting slightly. Well, that's interesting, she said. I could already feel the whispers forming, slithering through the air like smoke. I should go, I murmured, leaving the basket half full on the shelf. As I walked toward the door, I heard Janice's voice again, soft, playful, meant to be overheard. They say babies pick up traits from the people they spend the most time around. Isn't that funny? Laughter followed, quiet but sharp. I walked faster, pushing the door open, the bell's cheerful jingle cutting through the throb in my ears. By the time I reached home, the rumor had already begun to spread. Lena called that evening. Her tone was deceptively calm. I heard you ran into someone today. Yes, I said. Mr. Hale. And? He asked about the baby. He didn't mean anything by it. Oh, didn't he? Her voice turned cold. Funny, because Janice told me you were talking about birthmarks and similarities in public. I didn't. Don't lie, she snapped. You humiliated me. You humiliated David. Do you enjoy that? The accusation hit me so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Lena, I swear. But she had already hung up. The next morning David came by. His face was tight, his voice clipped. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Talk about Hale." At the store, people are calling Lena in tears. "She's devastated." "David," I said quietly, "listen to me. He mentioned the birthmark before I did. He said—" "I don't care what he said." My son's voice cracked. "You've gone too far. You're obsessed." "Obsessed?" I whispered. "Yes. This ends now, Mom. You're not welcome at the house until you apologize." Apologize. The word settled between us like poison. "For what?" I asked softly. "For seeing what's right in front of me?" He turned away. "For destroying what's left of this family." The door slammed behind him. That night I sat alone in the kitchen. The ticking of the clock grew louder with every second. The phone rang twice, but I didn't answer. I stared at the empty cradle I'd bought for when the baby stayed over something that would never happen now. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered to no one. I only wanted the truth. But truth, I realized, doesn't care who wants it. It just burns, quietly and without mercy. And that day, it burned my name straight out of their mouths. The house felt colder after that day, though the summer heat still pressed against the windows. The silence between us had thickened into something physical, like fog clinging to every wall. I wasn't banned from visiting outright, but I knew my presence wasn't welcome. The unspoken rule was clear. I could come by once a week, bring groceries, maybe hold the baby for a minute if Lena allowed it. I told myself that was enough. It wasn't. One Wednesday morning, I stopped by with homemade soup. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in. I called softly, "It's me," but no one answered. The baby's faint cries drifted from upstairs. I hesitated before climbing, careful not to make a sound. Their bedroom door was half closed, and from behind it came voices low, tense, urgent. "She won't stop," Lena whispered. I tried to be kind, but she keeps pushing. David's voice followed, tired and strained. "She's my mother, Lena. You have to understand she's been through a lot." "She's delusional," Lena hissed. "If she keeps talking like this, people will start asking questions. You don't want that, do you?" Silence. Then his voice, softer. "No, I don't." I pressed my hand to the wall to steady myself. The baby stopped crying, as if listening too. "I think she needs help," Lena said. "Professional help." "She's not crazy," David said weakly, but his tone carried no conviction. "She accused me of sleeping with a neighbor, David." "What happens when she tells someone else that? When she tells your boss or our friends? Think about our son. What kind of home will he grow up in if everyone thinks his grandmother is insane?" Her words were like acid slow, dissolving everything in their path. David sighed. "Just give me time. I'll talk to her." "No," she said firmly. "I'll handle it." My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I stepped back, the floorboard creaking. "Did you hear that?" Lena whispered. I hurried down the stairs, clutching the soup pot, pretending to arrange flowers in the hallway when they came down moments later. "Oh, Mom," Lena said sweetly, her face smooth and innocent. "You startled us. You should have called first." "I did," I lied. "You must not have heard." David looked uneasy. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just dropping off soup. Thought you could use a break." Lena took the pot from my hands. "That's kind of you, but please, next time, let us know before you come. We were having a private conversation." Private. The word lingered in the air like smoke. I nodded, murmured goodbye and left, but I didn't go home. Instead, I walked around the block until I reached the side of the house again. Their living room window was slightly open, curtains fluttering with the breeze. Inside, Lena's voice carried calm now, almost soothing. "She was listening, you know. She'll twist this around. We need to be careful." Then came David's sigh. "You think she'll stop?" "Not unless we make her," Lena said. I backed away slowly, the hairs on my arms rising. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in my small house, creaking wood, dripping faucet, felt like someone whispering my name. Around midnight, I went to the kitchen and made tea. When I opened the cabinet for sugar, a folded piece of mail slid out from between the jars. It wasn't mine. The envelope was cream-colored, with David's name scrawled in blue ink, but the return address caught my eye. Millerton Diagnostic Center. My stomach clenched. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that, but my hands moved on their own. Inside was a printed form medical, sterile, official. Across the top read, DNA paternity test results. I scanned the page. My eyes caught one line near the bottom. Result, not consistent. For a moment, the room tilted. The kettle hissed behind me. Forgotten. Not consistent. The words blurred, burned, branded themselves into my mind. I sank into a chair, gripping the paper. My body trembled not from surprise, but from the crushing weight of confirmation. It was true. Every suspicion, every uneasy glance, every whisper in the dark, they had all been real. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears sliding down my cheeks. The truth was finally in my hands, and yet it felt like I'd picked up a knife, because now I knew something that could destroy my son. By morning, I had made my decision. I would confront him quietly, gently, just the two of us. I would show him the letter, explain everything, help him see before she could twist the story again. But as I placed the envelope back into my purse, I caught sight of something through my front window. A car was parked outside, engine idling. Lena sat in the driver's seat, her sunglasses hiding her eyes, but her head was turned toward my house. Watching. Waiting. The realization chilled me. She already knew. And somehow I knew she wouldn't let me be the one to speak first. I didn't sleep at all that night. The envelope lay on the kitchen table beneath the faint yellow light, its edges curling slightly from my trembling fingers. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words again. Not consistent. I had proof now, proof that the baby wasn't David's. But proof, I was beginning to realize, was a dangerous thing. In the wrong hands, it could ruin not only Lena but my son too. By dawn, I made myself a promise. I would find out everything before confronting anyone. If I moved too soon, she would twist it again, make me the villain, the senile old woman with wild accusations. Not this time. At 9 a.m, I called the number printed on the letterhead Millerton Diagnostic Center. My voice shook slightly when I spoke. Hello, this is Mrs. Nolan. I believe there's been a mistake. I need to verify a test result issued to my son, David Nolan. The woman on the other end hesitated. I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't release private patient information. I understand, I said, forcing calm into my voice. But I'm his mother. It's urgent. She paused again, softer now. Can you confirm the case number? I read it out. There was a click, a rustle of paper, and then the woman sighed. The result was finalized last month. The test was requested by a Mrs. Lena Nolan. I froze. She ordered it? Yes. The client information lists her as the initiator. The father's name was entered as David Nolan. And the outcome? I can't discuss that, ma'am, she said, her voice gentle now, almost pitying. But if you have the paperwork, you already know. When I hung up, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely set the phone down. The test wasn't an accident. She had ordered it herself. She had known the truth before anyone else, and she'd hidden it. That afternoon, I decided to go to the clinic. Millerton was a 40-minute drive from my small town, but the entire way there, I couldn't stop imagining Lena's face the day she'd received those results. Had she smiled? Cried? Planned? The clinic sat between a pharmacy and a laundromat, unremarkable, quiet. I walked in, clutching my purse. The receptionist looked up, startled by my appearance, gray hair, determined eyes, a cardigan too heavy for the weather. Can I help you, ma'am? I lowered my voice. I need to speak with someone about a test done here last month. It concerns my family. She looked hesitant. Do you have a release form? No, but I have the case number. I handed her the envelope. She glanced at it, then at me. Something in my expression must have moved her, because she nodded and disappeared into the back. Minutes later, a middle-aged nurse stepped out. Her voice was low, cautious. You shouldn't have this, you know. I know, I said, but please tell me it's true. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry. That was all she said. She didn't need to say more. When I stepped back outside, the sun was blinding. Cars passed, children laughed. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But I stood there, frozen, holding that truth like a burning coal in my hands. Driving home, I rehearsed what I would say to David. I imagined sitting him down, speaking gently. Son, I need you to listen without anger. The child you love may not be yours, But that doesn't make you less of a father. I told myself that love could survive even this, that he would see reason, see me. But when I turned onto our street, my heart sank. Lena's car was already parked in my driveway. She was sitting on the porch swing, her phone in hand, smiling faintly as I approached. "Busy day, Mom?" she asked sweetly. My mouth went dry. "What are you doing here?" "Checking on you." Her tone was playful, but her eyes were calculating. "You didn't answer your phone, I was worried." He swallowed hard. "I had errands." "Millerton's quite far for errands," she said softly. My pulse quickened. "How do you—" "I know everything you do," she interrupted. "You think I wouldn't notice when my mail goes missing? You've crossed a line." I took a step back. "I found that envelope by accident. You lied to him, Lena. You lied to my son." Her smile didn't falter. "No, I protected him. He doesn't need to know. You'll only hurt him. I deserve to tell him the truth." She stood, her voice calm but cutting. "And I deserve to raise my child in peace. If you go to David with this, I'll tell him you stole his mail, that you're paranoid, unstable, losing your mind." My hands trembled. "You can't." "I already have," she said. "He's on his way." The sound of an approaching car broke the silence. David's car. Panic surged through me. "Lena, please don't do this." She leaned closer, her perfume sickly sweet. "I don't have to do anything. You've already done it for me." I watched helplessly as David stepped out, confusion in his eyes. Lena ran to him, tears already glistening. "She broke into our mail again," she sobbed. "I told her to stop, but she won't." He looked at me, then at the envelope still clutched in my hand. "Mom," he said slowly, disbelief and disappointment tangled in his voice. "What is this?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Lena's hand rested on his arm like a seal of ownership, and in that moment, I realized I had lost not just the argument, but the war. She had taken my truth and turned it into madness. As they drove away, the letter still warm in my trembling hands, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes, having proof doesn't save you. Sometimes, it buries you deeper. 2 days passed in silence. No phone calls. No messages. Not even a short note from David. The house that once echoed with laughter and arguments had become a tomb mine. I tried to tell myself that time would clear things up, that when the anger cooled, my son would remember who I was, what I'd done for him, the nights I stayed up through fevers and heartbreaks. But as the days dragged on, hope began to feel like a cruel joke. Then, on the third morning, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Lena stood there dressed perfectly, calm as ever, holding a small white envelope. The sunlight glinted off her wedding ring. "Good morning, Mom," she said sweetly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated. "What do you want?" "To talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Her heels clicked against the floor, each sound deliberate, claiming the space that used to be mine. She looked around with mock fondness. "You should really dust, you know. David always liked things neat." I ignored the jab. "Say what you came to say." She smiled, placing the envelope on the kitchen table. "I thought I'd help clear the air. It's the original DNA result official, sealed. You can give it to David yourself if you think it'll help." I stared at her, suspicion prickling the back of my neck. "Why would you bring me that?" "Because," she said, lowering her voice, "I'm tired of your accusations. You want the truth? Go ahead. Tell him. Let's see who he believes." Her tone was almost kind, almost. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The document inside looked identical to the one I'd seen before, except for one crucial line. The result now read, "Consistent with alleged father." I looked up sharply. "You changed it." Her lips curved. "Did I? Or maybe you imagined the first one. It's hard to tell these days, isn't it?" "You're sick," I whispered. "No," she said softly. "I'm smart. There's a difference." Then, with a sigh, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "By the way, I thought it would be wise to record this little visit, just to show David how aggressive you can be when you're upset." I froze. "You planned this." She tilted her head. "Planned? Oh, Mom, you make it sound so sinister. I'm just protecting my family." She placed the phone on the table, camera facing me. "Go ahead," she said. "Tell me again how I ruined your son's life." I could feel the trap closing around me. If I raised my voice, if I said the wrong word, she'd twist it, cut the video, make me look unhinged. So I stayed quiet. But she wanted a reaction. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "You know what the worst part is? He believes me, every word. He thinks you're confused, fragile. Do you want to know what he said last night?" I didn't answer. She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "He said he's worried you might hurt yourself." That broke something inside me. "Get out," I said hoarsely. She stepped back, smiling. "Gladly. But first, let's take a picture. It'll make a lovely memory for David." Before I could stop her, she lifted the phone, the camera clicking. Then she turned the screen toward me. The photo showed me standing rigid, eyes wide, mouth tense, exactly like the frightened, unstable woman she wanted me to appear to be. "There," she said softly. "Perfect." When she left, the house seemed to exhale with her, as if relieved she'd gone. I stood by the window, watching her car pull away, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. That evening, David called. His voice was heavy, resigned. "Mom, we need to talk." I sat down, gripping the edge of the table. "About what?" "Lena showed me the video," he said. "You were yelling. She said you accused her again." "I didn't." "Mom, please," he interrupted. "I can't keep doing this. You're hurting everyone. Maybe you need help. Just talk to someone." I felt my throat tighten. "David, she's lying to you. She wouldn't lie about something like this." "She already did," I whispered. "Twice." He sighed deeply, the sound of a man too tired to believe anymore. "We're going away for a while," he said. "Lena needs rest, the baby too. Please don't contact us until you've sorted things out." "David," I whispered, panic rising. "Please, don't let her take you away from me." But the line had already gone dead. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the faint echo of my own breathing. My eyes fell on the false report she had left on the table. The seal was unbroken, pristine, perfect. It was the kind of lie that looked official because it was made to last. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about a secret anymore. It was about erasure. She wasn't content with stealing my son's truth. She wanted to erase me from it completely. But I had one thing she didn't time, and I would use every breath left in my body to make sure the truth outlived her lies. I spent 3 days preparing for that night. 3 long, sleepless nights filled with whispers from my own mind and the ticking of the kitchen clock that seemed to mock me. Each second reminded me how far my son had drifted, how deep Lena had buried me under her lies. By the 3rd evening, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed to see him, to speak face to face, not through phones and falsified papers. The rain had begun to fall when I pulled up to their house. The windows glowed faintly, golden rectangles in the dark. For a moment, I stood outside, drenched, my reflection staring back from the glass hair clinging to my face, eyes hollow with exhaustion. I didn't look like the mother I used to be. I looked like the ghost she'd made of me. Inside, laughter floated faintly from the living room. I stepped closer and saw them through the open archway. David cradling the baby, Lena sitting beside him, her hand resting on his arm. The picture of a perfect family. Until she saw me. Her smile vanished, quick as a candle snuffed out. "Mom," David said, startled. "What are you doing here?" I stepped into the light, my coat dripping onto the hardwood floor. "I had to see you. We need to talk." He frowned. "You should have called first." "I did," I said quietly. "You didn't answer." Lena rose slowly, her voice soft but sharp underneath. "David, maybe this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I interrupted. My voice trembled, but I held it steady. "I'm not leaving until you hear me out." David sighed, the exhaustion in his eyes almost enough to break me. "What is it, Mom?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope, the real one, the one I'd copied and hidden before Lena could destroy it. The paper was creased from being held too many times, but the words were still there, clear and unforgiving, not consistent. "I know what she's done," I said. "I know what this says, and I know why she's trying to make you believe I've lost my mind." Lena's face went pale. Then she laughed a small, breathy sound. "You went through my private mail again? I found the truth you buried," I said coldly. David's voice cut in. Mom, enough. I looked at him. Please, just read it. You deserve to know. He didn't reach for it. His jaw clenched. You're sick, he whispered. You need help. The words hit harder than any slap. You think I forged this? I think you've convinced yourself of something that isn't true. I turned to Lena. You did this to him, I said. You turned him against his own blood. Her composure cracked for the first time. You're calling me a liar? In my home? I'm calling you what you are. David stood, the baby stirring in his arms. Stop it, both of you. You're scaring him. But I couldn't stop. The years of silence, the humiliation, the manipulation, all of it surged out of me like a flood I could no longer hold back. You think I'm crazy because that's what she wants you to think. She's been playing you since the day she met you, David. Ask her where she was that summer before your wedding. Ask her who— Enough! His voice thundered through the room. The baby began to cry. Lena took him quickly, turning away from me, whispering soothing nonsense words. I stepped forward, clutching the letter. You deserve to know whose child that is. David's face hardened. He's my son. No, I whispered. He isn't. The sound of my words seemed to fracture the air. Lena spun around, her eyes blazing now. How dare you? She hissed. You come into our home, you bring that garbage, and you call me a liar in front of my child? In front of my son, I said quietly. The man you've poisoned. Her voice dropped to a whisper that felt colder than shouting. You think anyone will believe you? Look at yourself, Mrs. Nolan. You're shaking. You're unstable. You're the poor, lonely widow who can't stand to see her son happy. I felt the tears burn my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You can call me anything you want. But lies have a way of rotting from the inside, and when yours do, I hope he's standing here to see what you really are. For a moment, the house was silent, except for the baby's sobs. Then David spoke softly. I think you should go. David. Now. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My throat felt like it was closing, my chest aching with every breath. I set the letter down on the coffee table. One day, I said quietly, you'll remember this moment, and you'll understand. Lena's eyes followed me as I turned to leave. Her expression was calm again, almost pitying. Goodbye, Mom, she said sweetly. We'll call you when things settle down. Outside, the rain had turned to a downpour. I stood in the driveway for a long time, soaked and shaking, watching the warm light through their window. Through the glass, I could still see David, my son, pacing with the baby, his shoulders hunched, Lena's hand stroking his back. For the first time, I realized she didn't need to scream to win. She only had to make him believe that I was the noise. And standing there in the cold, I understood something even worse. She had already succeeded. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. The rain had soaked me through, and yet I walked, mile after mile, until my shoes were heavy with mud and my heart felt hollow. Every step replayed David's voice in my head, cold, final, you're sick, Mom. By the time I reached my house, dawn was breaking. The world was quiet again, washed clean. I hung my coat by the door, made myself a cup of coffee, and stared out at the garden. The roses had wilted in the rain, their petals clinging to the wet soil. Somehow, it felt fitting. I didn't hear the knock at first. It came softly, 3 times. When I opened the door, no one was there. Only a small manila envelope resting on the porch. There was no name, no return address, just the faint scent of cologne that stirred something in my memory. Mr. Hale. My hands trembled as I picked it up and carried it to the kitchen. Inside was a single photograph, old, printed on glossy paper. It showed Lena, visibly pregnant, standing in front of Hale's hardware store in Millerton. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach, and beside her stood him. He was smiling, one arm draped over her shoulders, the other holding a small wrapped gift. Behind them, a sign read June 15th grand opening. June Kenseth. A full 6 months before the baby's supposed due date. My vision blurred. My breath came shallow and sharp. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 4 words. He deserves the truth. It wasn't signed. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that photo. Hours, maybe. The sunlight shifted across the floor, slow and indifferent. By afternoon, I made a decision, one last attempt. I would go to David, not as an accuser, but as his mother. I would bring the picture not as a weapon, but as a truth too heavy to carry alone. When I reached the house, Lena's car was gone. I felt both relief and dread. David answered the door, eyes red-rimmed, shirt wrinkled. He looked older than I remembered. "Mom," he said softly. "Please don't." "Just listen," I said. "I'm not here to fight. Just look at this, and then I'll leave." I handed him the photo. He frowned, flipping it over. "What is this?" "Millerton," I whispered. "June 15th. She told you she never saw him again after the wedding, didn't she?" He stared at it, silence stretching between us. For a moment, hope flickered maybe. Finally, he'd see. Then his expression hardened. "Where did you get this?" "It was left at my door." He shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. "So now you're getting anonymous mail about my wife? Do you realize how insane that sounds?" "David, look at the dates. Think, please." "I'm done thinking," he shouted. "I'm done living like every word out of your mouth is another accusation. You're not helping anyone, you're destroying us." The force of his voice startled even him. He turned away, raking his hands through his hair. "I can't do this anymore, Mom." I felt something collapse inside me. My knees weakened. I whispered, "You think I enjoy this? You think I want to hurt you? I'm trying to save you." He didn't answer. Then, from the doorway behind him, came another voice. Calm, sweet, poisoned. "She's right, you know." Lena stood there, holding the baby, her face soft with practiced sorrow. "She thinks she's saving you." "Lena," David said, sighing. "Please, not now." But she stepped closer, her tone quiet and measured. "She needs help, David. She's losing touch with reality. I caught her outside last night, staring at the window. I was afraid she might do something." "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking. "She's hallucinating," Lena continued, eyes on me. "It's not her fault. It's the grief, the loneliness. You saw her temper the other night." David looked torn, exhausted, trapped between two worlds. "Lena, stop." She lowered her voice further, almost a whisper. "If you won't, I will. I'm calling Dr. Harris tomorrow. We'll get her evaluated." "Evaluated?" I repeated, disbelief breaking into a raw laugh. "You'd put me in a home over your lies?" Lena's lips curved faintly. "It's for your own good." I looked at my son. "David, please, tell me you don't believe this." He couldn't meet my eyes. That was the moment I realized I'd lost him completely. The baby stirred, cooing softly. For a heartbeat, I saw him, the little boy, innocent, unaware of the war around him, my grandson, my blood, or maybe not. But none of that mattered now. "Give him to me," I said quietly. "Just once. Please." Lena hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I don't think that's safe." Something inside me broke. I took a step forward, desperate, trembling. "He's mine too." David moved instinctively, blocking me. "Mom!" I stopped. The sound of rain began again, faint against the roof. The world had gone very still. Slowly, I stepped back, wiping the tears from my cheeks. "You'll regret this," I whispered. Lena's smile was serene. "Maybe, but at least I'll have peace." And as she turned away, the baby's blanket shifted slightly. The red teardrop birthmark glistened under the light, brighter, sharper, almost bleeding. David didn't notice. But I did. I always did. That night, I returned home and placed the photo in the fireplace. The flames curled around the edges, devouring the faces, the smiles, the evidence. Some truths, I realized, don't set you free. They just burn everything else down with them. As the ashes settled, I whispered, "I forgive you, David, but not her." The fire hissed softly in reply, like it understood. After that night, the world became strangely quiet. There were no more phone calls, no letters, no visits. Even the neighbors stopped waving from across the street. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when the story is about an old woman who lost her mind. I suppose that's who I was to them now. The mad widow who accused her daughter-in-law of unthinkable things. The jealous mother who couldn't let her son grow up. The woman who cried wolf so many times that no one looked when the wolf finally came. Weeks passed, then months. Sometimes I caught myself listening for the sound of the baby's laughter from next door, only to remember that they had moved away. They'd sold the house, my house, and bought a new one in another county. David called once, briefly, to tell me. His voice was careful, polite. "It's what's best for everyone, Mom. You need peace, and so do we." Peace. That word again. Always peace, never truth. After he hung up, I sat in the kitchen and stared at the space on the wall where his childhood height marks used to be. Lena had painted over them long ago, but I could still see the faint outlines under the new coat of white, ghosts of inches, ghosts of years. Every morning I tried to build a routine to keep myself from thinking. I fed the stray cat that came to the porch, watered the dying roses, wrote in the journal my sister sent me. "Write it all down," she'd said. "At least then the truth won't die with you." So I did. Every memory, every word, every small cruelty Lena had dressed in sweetness. I wrote until my hand cramped and the ink ran out. But nothing could ease the ache of the empty house. One afternoon, the mailman brought a large envelope. The return address made my stomach twist. Street Mary's Hospital. Inside was a simple notice, a billing statement for an unpaid medical test under my name. The description read, "Cognitive Assessment, Geriatric Division." I hadn't been to the hospital. I hadn't agreed to any test. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was a note, referred by Dr. Harris at the request of family. My family. I laughed, then quietly at first, then louder, until the sound echoed through the empty rooms. They'd done it. They'd planted the final seed. Now, even on paper, I was the unstable old woman Lena had invented. That night, I dreamed of fire again, of ashes curling around a photo I'd burned, of that red teardrop mark glowing through the smoke. I woke before dawn, the air thick and heavy. Something in me snapped. I dressed, packed a small bag, and drove to Millerton before the sun rose. The streets were still wet from the night's rain. I parked in front of Hale's hardware store and sat there, staring at the faded sign, "Closed on Sundays." Of course it was. Through the glass, I could see dust settling on the shelves, sunlight glinting off unused tools. It looked empty, abandoned like a life half-lived. I stepped out of the car, clutching the steering wheel for balance. Across the street stood a small park, and for some reason I walked toward it. The benches were damp, the air smelled of wet earth. Children's chalk drawings covered the sidewalk, smiling suns, crooked hearts, stick figures holding hands. One of the drawings stopped me cold. It was a small figure, a baby with a red dot on its shoulder. Underneath, in clumsy letters, someone had written, "Daddy." My breath caught. For a second, I thought I might faint. Then I realized what it meant. Nothing and everything. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe fate mocking me. But I couldn't stop the tears that filled my eyes. I sat on the bench and whispered, "You win, Lena." Because she had. She'd taken my son, my home, my voice, and left me with the shell of myself. When I finally drove back home, dusk had fallen. The sky was the color of bruises. As I stepped inside, the silence wrapped around me like a shroud. I went to the kitchen, lit a candle, and opened my journal again. My hand trembled as I wrote, "If they ever read this, I want them to know I wasn't crazy. I was simply the only one willing to see what was right in front of us, and that's the loneliest kind of truth." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I could almost hear a baby's faint cry carried on the breeze, soft, fragile, fading into the night. I closed my eyes and listened until it was gone. By the time the candle burned out, I felt nothing but the stillness left behind. The collapse wasn't loud. It was a quiet surrender, a letting go of the fight that had consumed me. Somewhere out there, my son was holding a child who would never know me. A child who would grow up hearing stories about the grandmother who lost her mind. And I would be here, in the house that still smelled faintly of apples, waiting for a peace I no longer believed in. Autumn came early that year. The air turned cold before the leaves had finished changing, as if the world had lost its patience with beauty. The roses in my garden shriveled into brown knots, and I didn't bother to cut them back. I simply watched them fade, petal by petal, the same way everything else in my life had. It had been almost 6 months since I last saw my son. 6 months since the day he told me to get help. 6 months since I watched the taillights of his car disappear down the wet road, carrying my grandson away from me. The days passed slowly now. I marked time by the mail deliveries bills, advertisements, never letters. I'd stopped expecting his handwriting a long time ago. The only visitors were the mailman, the occasional church volunteer dropping off meals, and the stray tabby cat that had taken up residence on my porch. I called him Chance, because that's what I'd lost, and what he still had. Most mornings I made tea, and sat by the window, the same window where I'd once watched David playing in the yard, pretending to fight dragons with a wooden stick. I used to imagine his future, a wife who loved him, children who carried his kindness, laughter filling these walls. And in a way, all of that had come true, just not the way I'd hoped. Sometimes, if the wind was right, I could still hear echoes from the past, the soft hum of the baby monitor, the whisper of voices upstairs, the faint sound of a lullaby Lena used to sing. Those sounds lived in the house like ghosts. They weren't cruel, they just refused to leave. A few weeks ago I saw them. It was a Sunday morning. I'd gone into town to pick up milk, keeping my head down to avoid the pitying looks I still caught from time to time. As I stepped out of the grocery store, a silver SUV pulled into the parking lot. I knew the license plate before I even saw their faces. David got out first, wearing a dark coat, his hair shorter now, streaked with gray. He looked tired, older, but when I saw the little boy step out after him, my grandson, tall and sturdy for his age, my knees almost gave out. He was beautiful. And on his left shoulder, half hidden by his shirt collar, was the faint outline of that same red birthmark, the teardrop. He turned his head toward me for a split second, his eyes bright blue, the same blue as David's. Lena stepped out next, her hand immediately resting on his shoulder, steering him away. When her gaze met mine, she didn't glare or smile. She simply looked through me, as if I were air. "Come on, honey," she said to the boy. "Let's go." He glanced back once, curious, his small hand waving absently before she guided him toward the store. David hesitated, caught between us for a heartbeat, then followed her inside. I stood there by the car, the grocery bag trembling in my arms. The carton of milk fell, spilling across the pavement, but I didn't move. My chest hurt from how tightly I was holding the air in my lungs. He had waved at me, just once, but it was enough. When I got home, I went straight to the garden. The roses had nearly died, their stems dry and brittle. I knelt down and started cutting them back, whispering to the soil as if it were listening. "He's grown," I said softly. "He's strong." That night I dreamed of him again, the child with the red mark, running through the grass, laughing. In the dream, he called me Grandma. I woke with tears on my face, half believing it had really happened. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address again. My fingers shook as I opened it, half expecting another cruel trick, but inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no accusations, just one photograph. It was my grandson, playing in a park, sunlight spilling across his hair. He was smiling, looking up at someone just out of frame. On the back, there were 2 words written in a familiar, slanted hand. "He's safe." I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting wasn't David's, it wasn't Lena's, and somehow, deep inside, I already knew whose it was. Mr. Hale. I don't know if it was meant as kindness or guilt, but it was enough. Enough to know the child was cared for, that life had gone on. Enough to let me stop fighting ghosts I couldn't exorcise. That night, I opened my journal again. My handwriting looked smaller now, fragile. I wrote, "The truth isn't always meant to be spoken. Sometimes it's meant to be carried quietly, like a scar beneath clothing. Maybe peace doesn't come from being right, but from finally being done." I closed the book, set it beside the candle, and watched the flame flicker low. Outside, the wind shifted through the dead garden, carrying with it the faint scent of apples. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe without feeling the weight of guilt. He was safe. That was all that mattered. And if the world chose to believe I was crazy, then so be it. Let them. The truth didn't need to be seen anymore. It had already taken root somewhere beyond my reach. Spring returned quietly, without ceremony. The air softened, the earth thawed, and the first blades of green began to push through the dead soil. I thought the roses were gone for good, but one morning I stepped outside and found a single stem alive, thin, stubborn, reaching toward the light. I crouched beside it, brushing away the fallen leaves. The scent that rose from the damp ground was faint but familiar, the same fragrance that used to fill our home when everything still felt whole. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. It had been nearly a year since I'd last seen them. A year since my son turned his eyes away from mine. A year since the truth I carried had burned a hole through my heart. But I had stopped expecting anything from the world. Expectation is a cruel seed. It grows only disappointment. The house had changed with me. I sold most of the furniture, leaving only what was necessary. The walls, once full of family photos, now held only quiet shadows where frames used to hang. In the evenings, I sat by the window, watching dusk settle over the garden. The silence no longer frightened me, it felt earned, a kind of truce between me and the life I could not fix. Some nights, I still dreamed of him, the baby with the red birthmark. In those dreams, he was older now, running barefoot through the yard, his laughter echoing like bells. He never spoke, never turned when I called, but he always paused before disappearing into the trees. I'd wake with my heart full and empty at once. One morning as I swept the porch, a car slowed at the gate. I didn't recognize it at first. The windows were tinted, the paint glimmered in the sunlight, then the driver's door opened. It was David. He looked older, tired lines beneath his eyes, shoulders heavier with a kind of sorrow that no one could disguise. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the distance between us stretching like an invisible wall. "Mom," he said finally, his voice quiet. I was nearby. I nodded, unable to speak. He glanced around the yard, his gaze softening as it fell on the roses. "You kept the garden." "I tried," I said. "It does what it wants." We stood in silence for a moment, the wind tugging at his coat. I wanted to ask 100 questions about the boy, about their lives, about whether he still believed the things she said, but I stayed quiet. Some truths, I'd learned, needed no audience. He reached into his pocket and handed me a small envelope. "He wanted you to have this," he said. Inside was a drawing. Crayon lines on folded paper, uneven, messy, earnest. It showed a house, a tree, a woman with gray hair standing beside a small boy with a red dot on his shoulder. Above them, in shaky letters, were 2 words. "Hi, Grandma." My breath caught. "He's starting school next month," David said softly. "He asked about you." Tears blurred the drawing in my hands. "Does she know you're here?" He hesitated, looking toward the road. "No." There was something in his eyes, regret, maybe, or relief. "I can't stay long," he said. "I just wanted you to know he's happy. He's a good kid, kind." I nodded, my voice breaking. "Of course he is." David's gaze dropped to the ground. "Mom, I don't know what happened back then. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I'm sorry for all of it." The words struck me harder than any accusation had. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him the way I used to when nightmares woke him as a child. But all I said was, "Thank you." He turned to leave, pausing at the gate. "Take care of yourself," he murmured. "I will," I said. "You too." When the car disappeared down the road, I stood there for a long time, clutching the drawing to my chest. The wind rustled the garden, and the lone rose bent under its breath. I went to it, brushing a petal between my fingers. The sky had turned gold, the air thick with the smell of earth and memory. Somewhere far away, I thought I heard the faint laughter of a child. Or maybe it was only the wind again, carrying the sound of what was lost and what little had been returned. I went back inside, placed the drawing in my journal between the last 2 pages, and closed the book gently. Before blowing out the candle, I whispered the words that had sat in my heart for too long. Maybe he wasn't my blood, but for one heartbeat, he was my whole world. And with that, I let the silence settle not as punishment, but as peace. The garden outside swayed softly, petals falling like tiny confessions to the ground. If anyone ever asks what became of me, I hope they'll say this. She learned that truth doesn't always bring justice. Sometimes it only brings quiet. But even in that quiet, love still lives rooted deep beneath the ashes, waiting for spring.